I'm an only child, so I tend to be kind of an independent, kind of the kind of person who likes to just take projects and go on their own. I mean, it's kind of how I grew up. No siblings around to have to learn to play nice with. And also I come from an artistic background, so my grandfather taught high school art in Pennsylvania for 35 years, and kind of my family, my mom's side of the family is Pennsylvania Dutch, and they have a strong art kind of tradition. All the houses in the family are filled with art that's been made by grandma and great-grandma and great-great-grandma down the line. A friend from grad school, I wound up building through him and through another company which he was working with, a text messaging, an SMS messaging platform. Right, there are a million of these things right now. I'm sure you've seen on billboards all over the place, like text whatever to whatever number and get signed up. So 5 or 6 years ago, there were not as many of these options. I wound up building the system for them, which it's still around, and it's processed millions and millions of messages, hundreds of thousands of users, and on a definite shoestring budget. I mean, this is another kind of benefit of me working the way I do, is that I've never been full time on this thing. It's been for a while I was working on it fairly consistently, but never more than a few hours a week. We had like different text messaging kind of games or things like trivia or voting or whatnot that were used in places like Times Square and the Astrodome and kind of big public spaces, and all based off of this thing which they had one developer working on for a small amount of time. And the disruption there is that they were competing against companies who had teams of full-time people working on equivalent products, but because they had they believed in what I was capable of doing, and and it was a good belief because it worked. They were able to have this thing that was very it was very profitable for everybody. Like, my brain works in different ways over the course of the day, like any developer, and being freelance is very easy. Like, if I'm feeling inspired to work on the hard problem at 10 o'clock in the morning, then I can do that. If I'm not, then I can go do something that will refresh my brain, like go read a book for a couple of hours or take a walk. From talking to people and from my limited experience working for in a large programming firm, I feel like that's not really paid attention to as much. And I find, like, for people like me as well, it helps me. And I think for people who work full-time for companies, I mean, it helps me to compress more into my time, having a more diverse set of projects to work on. Because when I'm in my programming mindset, then I can just sit down and code for a couple hours and get a tremendous amount done. If I'm in a more of a design or creative mindset, I've also got user experience work that can be done, or visual design work that can be done, so I can switch gears. As I think that's part of the way. It's part of the reason this works so well for me, is that I can compress more into my day because I've got more of a diverse set of things happening. Companies could be getting more out of these people, and not in a bad sense, not like milking, not like, rain blood from stone, but, could just get more quality work and a happy worker at the same time, by kind of accepting a little bit more of the way a developer's mind or any creative mind, is going to work. The principle of simplicity, which is in everything you're adding to a project, whether it's in the user experience design or the social media design or even the technology, just ask yourself, what purpose does it serve? And if it doesn't serve a purpose, get rid of it. I use this argument a lot with visual design, just because people tend to like to apply visual flourishes all over everything. And I tend to be a little bit more rigid about it than some people, but one of my questions that I like to ask is, like, any little thing that's a positive change that you're applying to this, whether it's adding colors to something or putting boxes around something, like, does it serve a purpose? Like, can you make an argument? And I'm not against, like, making things look nicer. I think that that's serving a purpose, but can you make an argument for its existence? And if you can't, it needs to go. Making sure that everything in the product has a purpose, and that you can say this has a purpose. If the purpose of the thing is to make life easier for your HR people, that's not really a good purpose. So it has to have a purpose for the right people. And generally speaking, that's going to be your end users, right? So if let's use an example of, I'll pick a controversial one because I've heard a lot of debate on this. But let's password resets. Okay, so there's kind of this ongoing debate about password resets. A lot of people, developers especially, get all sorts of freaked out if you email back a password to a user because it indicates the password's not being held securely and blah, blah, blah. When you're dealing with a bank, you don't want an insecure password. If you're dealing with some social media site that gets hacked, yeah, you know, what do you lose? Your user doesn't really lose a lot. Nobody's going to get their credit card stolen. You've got companies that don't need to have don't need to have those extra steps built around having password security internally, but they do anyway because of their developers, which are not their end users, right? Because they've got a developer on the team who's going to be like, no, we need high security, like, when they don't necessarily need that level of high security. Now, I mean, obviously, like I said, a bank is one thing, and but there are many social media services which you use which do not contain critical information about you. But the password reset process can be cumbersome, especially to a non-technical user. Like my mom is going to use this service, and that's because they're designing this thing at the behest of the developer and not thinking as much about the end users. But what one might call the application movement, which is basically, so Apple and Google with their devices kind of made mainstream these much more quick and powerful apps that kind of take over the device. I think we're gonna see a flourishing in those sorts of things. I think there are a lot of elements of social media and social application design which people feel like are etched in stone because they've been around for a while. An example might be like the friend connection in Facebook, how I click that you're my friend, you click that you're my friend, or whatever, and then we're connected. I feel like a lot of these principles are gonna expand. So you're already kind of seeing like Google with their Google Plus has really put this circles thing. I really feel like we're gonna see a blossoming of different kinds of social notions, different sorts of social ideas that are gonna be explored. I mean, there are a million ways that humans are social. And right now, we might be exploring in a serious way 5 or 10 of them. So, I think there's going to be, I think that there's a lot of fertile room for people to come and think about how, how we interact through these systems. It's one of the reasons I like games. I feel like people also have this unnatural divide between serious apps and games or fun apps. What's interesting about games and social gaming is that social games are all about exploring those new ways of interacting together. And I think that to a certain degree, these serious social app developers are beginning to look into the world of game design. When I think of companies who are putting budgets into making Facebook pages because they want people to click those like buttons and share things virally amongst their friends, there's so much room in there for a lot of interesting, innovative stuff, which is going to be much more valuable and relevant and interesting to the users than just having people go to the Facebook page and click like. I actually just finished teaching a high school class about game design. One thing that impressed me is that they're all extremely technically savvy. I think it wound up being a 7-week class, 2 hours once a week, with a small handful of kids, I think about 5 or 6. And we took the first class and kind of talked about the general concept of game design, like what is a game, what makes a game fun, how does one design a game. And then pretty much I cut them loose with this program called Game Maker by Yo-Yo Games. And, a real simple kind of tool just to make 2D sprite-based games, kind of make earlier Nintendo style stuff. It doesn't use actual programming, but it uses a lot of programming concepts, like you have to know if then, you have to know how loops work in order to make things move, events, so the person pushes the space bar and the thing fires. So you're not actually programming, but it's a lot of programming concepts. And I was shocked at how fast they picked up this concept. Made these relatively sophisticated games. I mean, considering that they were 15 and 16, and this first time that they made a game, they came up with some relatively sophisticated stuff. Just from that little nudge, and I think that I don't know, that was one of the eye-opening things to me, was just the level of technical savviness and even programming savviness that these kids kind of had naturally.